Hello folks, it is Soul with some more Shadowlands Alpha coverage. Today we're going to get into the nitty-gritty with Protection Paladins, the spec that I know best, which, it's not saying much, but how are they faring in Shadowlands so far? Do they suck? Is Fan of Shields all that it's cracked up to be, although I'm not really going to answer that today. This coverage is based on the most current Shadowlands Alpha, and I repeat, it's the Alpha. I'm not going to be talking about Covenant abilities, or Soulbinds, or Conduits, or Torghast because, well, they're not available for testing yet on Paladins, and, well, they can change many of my impressions. I'm not going to give feedback on speculation or theory crafting, so all that stuff is going to be in a separate video. Please stay tuned for that. But with that said, let's go over what we know because, well, there's already still a lot of stuff. First off, the big changes. The Shield of the Righteous charge system is being dropped in favor of Holy Power, a more old-fashioned system of generating this Holy Power stuff using specific abilities, aka builders, to use other abilities, known as spenders. Other talents and abilities have been changed to reflect the move, and we're going to go over those a little bit later. Builders include Hammer of the Righteous, or Blessed Hammer if you spec for it, Judgment, Avenger Shield, and Hammer of Wrath by default. Spenders include Shield of the Righteous, Seraphim if you picked up that talent, and Word of Glory, another returning ability that is going to replace Lighter the Protector, but it is usable on other targets by default. There's also a new passive called Shining Light. It's a buff that reduces the cost of your Word of Glory by 1 Holy Power, it stacks up to 3, and has a 15-second cooldown. This is going to affect the effectiveness of some of your talents though, which I'm going to talk about later. The switch to Holy Power didn't take all that long for me to get accustomed to. I think of it as more transactional to the charge system because you have, I don't know, I guess it was before we had those moments where you're hoping that Judgment will crit so that way you can get another shield slam thing off, then you can heal yourself. But no, you were just a second short or you didn't crit and then you're dead. With Holy Power, you at least know what your next Judgment is going to do, guaranteed, so you know you can kind of mentally think ahead and strategize. But there are a few bigger differences to get used to, or even complain about. You see, when out of combat for 20 seconds, your Holy Power starts to decay at a rate of 1 per 10 seconds, meaning that you can't just open up with spenders unless you just finished an encounter and you happen to bank Holy Power for a little bit. There are talents and such that help mitigate this. For example, you can spec for Blessed Hammer and throw hammers at nothing to build Holy Power while outside of combat. But at the moment, Paladins are a little bit more vulnerable at the pull than they were in Battle for Azeroth. Since both Word of Glory and Shield of the Righteous use Holy Power, that means both abilities will sort of compete or fight for this resource. If you spec Seraphim, now there's a third ability to weave in every 45 or so seconds. I mentioned Shining Light, which makes using Judgment as critical as ever to use when it's off cooldown, because this can make your Word of Glory free after getting 3 stacks of Shining Light, which will, free up Shield of the Righteous or Seraphim to be used whenever you want. Before talent, this creates a ramp-up time that's similar to other classes who need to build up rage or other resources to fuel abilities. Again, it's a little bit awkward because Paladins are just used to front-loading DPS or threat on the pull, and using our self-heal whenever it's off cooldown, not when we have resources, and this slows it down just a bit. Now let's move on to the unpruning of abilities. Here's what Paladins are getting back, and this happens to apply to all specializations. You might have known this one already, we're getting auras back. Devotion, Concentration, Crusader, and Retribution. Devotion reduces all damage taken as it has been recently, it just kind of went away from simply adding armor. Concentration and Crusader Aura haven't changed, but Retribution has this curious change. So while it's active, when any party member or raid member dies, your Avenging Wrath will activate for 12 seconds. So let me pause for a second to give some feedback on this. I'm just not too cool with this one. I mean, it makes sense, okay? Retribution Aura, someone dies and we get pissed, we get hulked out, sure. But when examining this with player behavior in mind, what am I supposed to do with this? It's like, oh, I think someone's gonna die soon, I better switch to Ret Aura and get the buff. Or, hey, this person's dying, I can choose to either heal them with my Word of Glory, or let them die so I can do more DPS. Because I should mention that auras are on the global cooldown too. I'd be happier with an ability that doesn't proc on death, right? How about if a target is dropped, I don't know, between 0 and 20% health, and then Avenging Wrath procs for fewer seconds, like 8 seconds, enough for a few hits, and had a passive cooldown of 1 minute. That would discourage the whole idea of aura dancing, or hoping that friends die, at the very least. Or just give us the classic Retribution Aura, but with more teeth than it had in previous expansions. Anyway, moving on, the old Hammer of Wrath is back, and it's baseline for all specs. For protection, it generates 1 holy power, and it is freely usable during Avenging Wrath, which is to say that it's usable like 3 or 4 times while that's running. I'm happy that it's back. It's a nice, shiny button to press and all, but in practice I'm finding it to be a button that has a little bit of a hard time finding its place. Paladins have a lot of ranged sustainability between throwing Judgment and Avenger Shield. Hammer of Wrath has a greater value if I spec away from the Crusaders Judgment talent, which gives you 2 charges of Judgment, so that's sticking around. But you'll see once I get to talents that the talents in this particular row are a bit more compelling than before. But to quickly wrap this one up, it's a nice button. It hits hard, you know, Paladin, woo, go team. Finally, Turn Evil makes its return. Like that. It has a short cast, a 15-second cooldown, and it fears both undead, aberrations, and demons, so we get a nice bit of crowd control back. Now, let's move on to the talent changes. We're gonna go row by row. Over on the first row, Redoubt has been totally revamped. Before, it added 1 bounce to Avenger Shield, and it added a little bit of block. Cute. Now, every time you use Shield of the Righteous, you gain a buff for 6 seconds that stacks up to 3 times, granting you 2% strength and stamina per stack. It's not very attractive, right? So I'd still much rather have the magic defense of Holy Shield. Meanwhile, Blessed Hammer got a bit of a change too. It now reduces the damage that you take by a fixed value, not a percentage. So this makes the ability a little bit more attractive for not so hard-hitting mobs, but the lack of percentage scaling makes it less great for raid bosses, so yeah, I'm still a fan of Holy Shield. Okay, off to the next row. First Avenger got itself quite a revamp, and it now adds 2 bounces to your Avenger Shield, and 100% of the damage that it deals turns into an Absorb Shield, so yay! I'm both a Warlords of Draenor and Legion Paladin all in one talent. It does lose the damage bonus against the first target though, so this talent won't be so great for a single target encounter. Crusaders Judgment hasn't changed and is still, at least in my opinion, the best feeling single target talent on the row, but a new talent has been added to replace Bastion of Light, and that is Moments of Glory. It's a passive where, while Ardent Defender is active, which lasts for 8 seconds, melee attacks you take are guaranteed to proc Grand Crusader, so basically pop Ardent Defender and use Avenger Shield with impunity. It's not the most bestest talent ever, but this does turn Ardent Defender into a holy power generator, making it both a defensive and offensive cooldown. The third row hasn't changed really, except to modify how Fist of Justice works. Its cooldown is now reduced whenever you use holy power spenders. However, keep in mind that Shining Light reduces holy power costs, meaning that 0 cost Word of Glory will not reduce the cooldown of Hammer of Justice. It's also worth a reminder that we now have Turn Evil available as an additional CC against certain mob types. Down on row 4, Retribution is now baseline, so that's off, and it's been replaced with Unbreakable Spirit, which we're pretty familiar with. That's about it for that row. Row 5 though was almost totally redone, with talents either being shoved around or removed outright. Divine Purpose is back on the Protection talent bar, which gives spenders a chance to make your next spender free and 20% stronger. The 15% chance though, compared to 20% in past expansions, is a little bit of a turnoff though. And keep in mind, Divine Purpose does make your next spender free, so it's not like you can double dip with other talents. Holy Avenger is available for protection now, which virtually guarantees Word of Glory and active mitigation uptime, not to mention a bit of an AoE burst with so many shields that you'll be throwing out. And then there's Seraphim, which personally I still don't like very much, but thanks to switching to Holy Power, it makes it a little bit easier to pop off on the fly. The next row is where a few talents got shoved into, because I'm thinking they just needed a place to be. The talents are familiar, but Hand of the Protector was altered just a little bit to reflect that it can do healing based on the target's health, and not a fixed amount. On the bottom row, we now get Sanctified Wrath, which makes Avenging Wrath kind of like Holy Avenger, but sort of less. Righteous Protector is back in a similar form, just modified to work with Holy Power, but once again, Shining Light will reduce the effectiveness that Word of Glory provides. And then tucked in the corner over there is Familiar Final Stand. There are some pretty cool synergies here, like picking up Crusaders Judgment and Sanctified Wrath for some pretty crazy Holy Power generation, and then pick up Holy Avenger to have 2 separate cooldowns that you can chain back to back for some extremely high shield uptime. Don't stack these, it's not going to help. And then throw in Moment of Glory, and then you have a 3rd cooldown to chain, so this can give you nearly a minute of high burst AoE. With the drawback that you might just be really vulnerable outside of these cooldowns. Classic Paladin, right? There are some negative synergies though, which I already kind of mentioned, but I'll just say it again. Divine Purpose procs will make your next spender free, which also means that those spenders won't work with the Fist of Justice or Righteous Protector talents. You can think of it as kind of a trade-off, but it's sort of a bummer too. I said I wouldn't talk about Covenant abilities, but I ought to at least bring up Divine Toll, aka Fan of Shields for protection under the Kyrian Covenant. It fires off to 5 Avenger shields in every which way direction. However, this does not synergize with the first Avenger talent, which would make Divine Toll an exceptional damage, mitigation, and Holy Power generator all in one button. By comparison though, as Holy Spec, Divine Toll does synergize with the Glimmer talent, so I'm not quite sure if there's going to be some sort of consistency that Blizzard wants to maintain. Like, are they going to add this Covenant and talent synergy, or are they going to just take it out of Holy as well? Whatever the case, is this fun? Are we having fun? Am I having fun? Are Paladins god tier tanks in Shadowlands? I'm just here to give some impressions, I can't answer that question yet. I talked about class and talent changes, but there's still expansion features to talk about in the very near future, I hope. Covenant abilities, Soulbinds, Conduits, and then there's that new game mode of Torghast. How are Paladins going to fare in there? Are their anima powers any good? For now, I can only give you these impressions, a snapshot, how I feel with what I've got in the place that we're at. And I like it, mostly. Like I said, Holy Power didn't take long to get used to, but entering combat is going to take some getting used to. We can open up in our usual way, but at the moment we're just a little bit squishier. Outside of talents, we need a few globals to get that first active mitigation or heal at the ready. As a suggestion, I think letting Holy Power charge up to 3 for protection out of combat pretty much solves the issue cleanly. Meanwhile, Word of Glory feels like a bit of a nerf compared to Light of the Protector, especially when it comes to healing my party or raid members, something that I personally like to focus on. Thanks to Word of Glory sharing resource consumption with my shield, I have to either wait until Shining Light is fully stacked, or make the conscious decision to forego my own mitigation in favor of healing someone else. Now, if this philosophy was like the way it always was, then there'd be nothing for me to be mad about, but in this case, now it's another step down from Legion, because Word of Glory is on the global. I don't know if it would make a big difference, but at least take Word of Glory off the global cooldown. So if I am going to make a tactical risk, it's that I'm making a resource decision, not that I also have to pre-plan it. And Red Aura still sucks. An ability that has no use if no one dies that isn't a combat res, it just doesn't feel right to me. On the other hand, I really like how talents are working out. Redoubt could use some work, and I do think Divine Purpose could do better with a higher proc rate, but I really enjoyed tinkering around with different synergies and imagining what I could put together. Like if I synced Holy Avenger with Fist of Justice and Righteous Protector, I can easily get multiple stuns off while taking a huge chunk off of my major cooldowns. And overall, combat feels pretty fluid. Button downtime is about what I'm used to, even on a pre-made character with default stats. Hammer of Wrath would help fill this out, but keep in mind that in the footage that I'm using, I'm not level 58, and you need to be level 58 for Hammer of Wrath to have the rank to be usable during Avenging Wrath. Sorry about that. But that's about all the feedback that I have for now. There's still the other features to cover once they're fully testable, and then I'll be able to give my complete thoughts on the likes of Fan of Shields, or the Crimson Octagon as I like to call them. Anyway, I hope this feature was informative, so if you don't mind, leave a like for the video and subscribe for more Shadowlands coverage and all things Warcraft. We'll see you later. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.